I want to introduce our panel formally. And so I want to welcome you all. First and foremost, thank you guys for taking the time to do this today. I really appreciate you guys doing this. And so Peter, why don't we start with you? If you could just introduce yourself and sort of the type of productions you work on, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, my name is Peter Phok with Phok Productions. I'm a producer of 15 years, generally in the independent features, and currently working on an independent feature that's shooting in New Zealand and with post in Los Angeles with an LA-based editor, which is where Avid Edit On Demand came in very handy for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter, for being here today. Steve, why don't you go next?
Hi, Steve Regina. I'm Director of Engineering at A+E Networks. So we're A&E, History, Lifetime, and Viceland channels. We are currently using Edit On Demand for some in-house produced shows, and it's been very handy.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And then last but certainly not least, Tim, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm the tech manager of ITV Daytime. My name's Tim Gilder. And we are Avid users, an Avid house who have been battling with all the restrictions around COVID the past year, but also on the flip side have made a lot of discoveries along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. So I want to start with life before the pandemic, right? When you think about what life was like before the pandemic from a production perspective, can each one of you sort of describe sort of your thoughts and attitudes around things like using either cloud or even remote, and distributed workforces, right? In terms of, your thoughts before the pandemic hit, when you thought about, for example, remote workforce, right? Perhaps you were thinking remote as in on set, as opposed to nowadays working from home. So I guess, Steve, can you start, can you just kind of talk about what life was like pre-pandemic from a production perspective on those two angles?
Yeah, sure. Day to day, we had a pretty large Avid footprint, 25 media composer rooms, plus a lot of support stations. And, we used to run 2 shifts a day shift and a night shift editing. Mostly promo stuff for our on-air channels. And then we started to break away and do more in-house productions where we're actually the content creators. So we've been sectioning off parts of those rooms for some productions that we're doing in-house now. And as that started to grow, we started to grow our Avid footprint. But day to day, 2 shifts, a lot of rooms, a lot of movement.
And were you guys doing anything with the cloud yet, or was that still?
The cloud, where we see the cloud, or at least our first forays into the cloud, finished assets, assets acquisitions and distribution to our world partners, our partners around the globe who are taking our content and playing out our content. Yep. That's the most easily adaptable. The first part really to move to the cloud.
Gotcha. Peter, how about you? What was life like before the pandemic for you?
Life before the pandemic was more traditional. Production obviously, would carry on. We were always traveling for production, and then editorial media was then prepared, whether usually like the Daily's house that we would partner with would prepare editorial media and then get that over physically, and sometimes occasionally over, a big pipeline to the editorial facility, wherever the editor was stationed. And then once the pandemic hit and there was closures, we had to then quickly shift to the editors working at home. In that situation, these independent films, we don't have a big post-production team. It's generally just a main editor and generally 1 assistant. And so on that particular project, we just brought 2 Avids to their homes with basically clone media, and then the assistant editor was basically kind of keeping it in sync as best as possible.
Very cool. Tim, how about you? What was life like pre-pandemic in terms of production for you?
So very traditional, as the other chaps have said as well, end-to-end Avid workflow for us for 7.5 hours of every day news and magazine style programming. We'd be building our shows on iNews, ingesting them on Airspeeds, editing on Media Composer with the news option, and then playing them out on Airspeeds, all on-prem in West London, in Studio Works. Large Nexus on-prem as well. Mm-hmm. I think there was a slight turning of the tide just before the pandemic, where we were looking into remote access to these systems for people who may have, gone home and need to do something over the weekend, sort of dialing into systems. And we'd proven the concept, but we hadn't really used it in too much anger until we suddenly had to, and we were forced to. So there was a huge kind of turn of speed. I think we probably moved 5 years of progression in 1 year, and it's been pacey, and we've had an amazing group of support engineers and also users as well for being patient with some of the requirements that we had to get out to them so that they could work from home in a resilient way, in a kind of productive way, and keep those 7.5 hours, those 4 shows on air. And we have managed to get 75% of our editing has stayed off premises, so remoting into systems that, as you see now, are still in London as it stands. But the next iteration of that, or the evolution of that, is certainly to move some of those pieces of equipment into the cloud.
So the pandemic hits, Tim, and you realize everybody's now got to work from home. What was the first thought that went through your mind, and how did you guys pivot quickly to enable folks to do that, basically keep business continuity, right?
Yeah, with a large amount of documentation and video tutorials and late night phone calls, and it was stressful for a while, but we were fortunate, as I say, to have been looking at it slightly beforehand. I think now will be, if something were to happen again like that, we'll be certainly more prepared, and it won't be as much of a kind of a bit of luck as it was, But I think it's also exposed the fact that some things aren't as well backed up as they could be in the design. My phone is arguably slightly more backed up than my Nexus, and that's a bit outrageous, really, because there's a lot of content on that Nexus which has a huge value. My phone has obviously value as well with family pictures and things, but our content is geographically located in West London with our production teams. So yeah, we've half solved the battle, and now we're going through pilots and proof of concepts to finesse what we've learned in the last year.
Very cool. Steve, I've heard from various different customers, different stories, right? People, everything from grab a workstation and some USB drives to, how do we basically turn on these remote services that we've heard about, maybe we've toyed with, but never really fully implemented. How did A&E deal with it?
This is true. Business continuity has always been something we've been talking about for a long time. What happens if? And we've had some drills over the past few years. About 3 years ago, we had a fire and we had to evacuate the building. And then a couple of years later, we had a air conditioning mold problem and we had to empty the edit rooms. So the mad scramble was something we were used to. Yeah. But when the pandemic hit, immediately everybody, the tech ops department all ran, let's start parking all these projects in Interplay and get them on drives, and then we can send the drives home and we'll deal with renting machines or souping up machines and sending them to the editors. We have been playing around with some Teradici stuff, and someone had mentioned, HP RGS is a really good solution. Yeah. Being you're an HP house, we started doing some quick tests with that, and we found that it was a viable solution. So, my team, the engineering team, mobilized, and we grabbed every IT laptop we can get our hands on and loaded RGS, because we had about 50 editors outfitted home to be able to remote in. Yeah. So we did that pivot from let's park everything and send the media out to let's get everybody in a remote and host situation. And it worked very well. And it got us moving, and it got the content, with a little bit of a hiccup, but it got us working pretty quickly in the pandemic work from home situation.
How long do you think it took, Steve, to kind of get everybody, working at home, feeling pretty confident about what they're doing? Like, how long do you think it took?
It's still going on. No.
Still going on. Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, right.
It was about a week to a week and a half until we can get everything out. We started off small with some smaller projects, or actually we took care of some stuff that had tight deadlines. We took care of that stuff first and got them working. Then we circled back on some of the marketing stuff and got those guys working. So it was about a couple of weeks until we were 80% back to 80%, 90% capacity. So
very cool, very interesting. Peter, how about you? So you talked a little bit about it, but like were you mid-project when the pandemic hit, or what was the initial scenario you were in when it all kind of happened? And then how did you guys react, and how long did it take?
Yeah, we were probably a few weeks into near the end of a director's cut on an independent feature film, working in a post facility with traditional, two Avid setup over Nexus shared media. And then, and this is based in Los Angeles, California. And so I think we were one of the first to get that stay-at-home order. And so we kind of anticipated and checking with the facility of are they going to close our access to it? And we started to make sort of efforts into tracking down a vendor to be able to drop an Avid setup, including from the table, chair, the whole works, the whole at each editor's home, and hope that they had space to accommodate what we're doing. But our assistant editor, our editor, were all very accommodating, and then the director and the editor had to kind of figure out a solution for them to communicate while they were still kind of working together, sort of beyond the director edit period and then into sort of the producer notes. And so that certainly extended our post schedule. And then we, at that point, kind of lost the nexus. And so, we then really had to work off of clone media, but there wasn't really any new media introduced at that point other than some music, potentially. And so this is use some tools to basically try to keep the project in sync and just constantly be sending the bins back and forth, which they had already kind of been doing. So, and it worked out, and we were able to kind of see the whole film go through the rest of the post-production process through completion, in 2020.
Amazing. So, all right. So now you're considering now, you're in the pandemic, you've set up folks to work from home. How did you learn first about edit on demand and sort of what it could do, and then what was your experience with it in general? Steve, why don't you go first?
There was a lot of logistics. Editors, when they got home, are they working on a laptop, looking up screens, how all that stuff. So how we first heard about edit on demand?
Yeah.
It was all that kind of stuff, and then it was expansion. We need more edit rooms. We need more. The biggest thing that happened was shifts went away. We were no longer AM PM shifts. All editors were working at the same time, so we had to increase our host count.
Yeah.
And logistically, that gets difficult. I've got racks and racks of HP workstations, and it comes a point where we just meet capacity.
Yeah.
So in conversations with our Avid sales guy, Media Composer as a service was something that we've talked about, and was it ready? And it was sometime in August, September, we started getting into some real in-depth conversations with Avid about where does this stand, where is it at, and when can we try it? And we did a full-blown POC, I want to say October.
Mm-hmm.
We test drove it for a couple of weeks.
Very cool. And you did, how many folks were part of the test? How many folks did you have take part in the POC?
I think it was about 5 stations, and we passed it around between maybe a dozen people. Everybody played with it. We loaded some media, started a couple projects, and some editors tried it, some tech ops people tried it, and the feedback was very encouraging.
Tim, how about you? How did you guys first hear about it, and what was your initial sort of experience with it?
Yeah, very similar in a way. As I say, we got across the line, and we didn't drop any VTs or content by using this remote tool called No Machine, ironically named because you do need a machine. And the machines are on-prem, everyone's remoting into them on their ITV issued laptops. They've got the extra screens. And then it was just, thinking about the art of the possible, really. How could we evolve this further? Speaking to our contacts at Avid, and looking at edit on demand with a keen eye, and just wanting to have a go. So we reran a long-form documentary commission that we'd edited and delivered to air. So completely de-risked it and just had a sort of sandbox or sandpit environment to play with, and quickly had some great lessons from that. For instance, if running Teradici as an app on your ITV issued laptop isn't quite as efficient as if you have some dedicated hardware, and we've been using the 10 zig thin client boxes, which give you a bit of extra acceleration, and they kind of iron out some of the bumps that our craft editors would be the first to complain if there was a slight lag or delay, and it wasn't anything like being in the office. But the reports, from that experiment were that, wow, this is actually in some ways faster when we're rendering and things like that. And it's because, the edit on demand system is based in the cloud and on systems that are, slightly more powerful than what we've got on-prem. So it wasn't a huge surprise. The main concern really is around connectivity. People's home broadbands, but there are ways to sort of mitigate against that. As I say, dedicated hardware, making sure it's connected on a cable, for instance. Some people do miss that kind of one. But once we've looked at that, and people have spoken to their providers, and maybe we can bolster it with some sort of hotspots and Wi-Fi connectivity for those kind of disaster situations, then actually we're finding that you don't need quite as much broadband connectivity as once thought, because of those bits of hardware and those measures put in place. So we've been really encouraged by that kind of proof of concept, and now taking it on to the next step, which is really kind of expanding that out to an ecosystem that's very similar to what we've got on site. So a whole Nexus in the cloud, Interplay in the cloud, etc. So it's not just a standalone edit, it's a mirror of what we have largely on-prem.
Very cool. And what type of productions, Tim, were you guys doing? Is it more like news magazine type shows, or like what types of shows are you thinking you're going to be doing with Edit on Demand?
Well, we were on there from 6 o'clock in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon every day. But as a label within ITV, we also win long form documentary commissions as well. And our system was designed around those 4 shows and those hours of operation. But I think, as Steve was saying, there's a constant expansion and production requirement. And we're literally running out of office space, we're running out of bay space, those bays, and the cooling and the power has all been scoped for a requirement. And as a technologist, you don't want to be the one that stops people from, winning commissions or being creative. You just want to give them every tool they can get, but within the constraints of a physical building. So we just started to think around, it doesn't necessarily need to be in a bay, perhaps, or it doesn't need to be in an edit suite. Where else could it go? Do we need as much tin? And we've just been, blown away really by the possibilities. And I think, in this coming year, we'll be completely basing some of those commissions away from the on-prem stuff and the day-to-day, and de-risking any kind of load that we'd be putting on that unnecessarily, and completely running that in the cloud, which is really cool. Yeah.
It's amazing. So Peter, you are doing a film, and while your team is kind of small, can you just describe, your workflow and what you're doing, and similar, like how did you first learn about it on demand, and then what did you do to sort of try it out first, and then ultimately use it for a real production?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were kind of in the early stages of pre-production. I mean, with the pandemic, production being shut down, around the world, majority on feature films. And so, but we got an opening with production for A24 Films to film a feature in New Zealand, where the COVID sort of response was a lot better, and it allowed for our film to kind of move forward. And so I just needed to kind of determine how we would approach editorial. Traditionally for shooting there, we would have a local on-prem generally facility that would be handling dailies, and then not only was it remote, as an American production filming in New Zealand, it was also in a remote environment within New Zealand. And so it wasn't going to prove to work well to do dailies at a a traditional facility. And so we had to kind of figure out also a workflow to manage dailies on set and then not, have any sort of delay. And the decision was made to work with an LA-based editor as well. And so that's when I started to do my research, through Avid and discovered sort of edit on demand. And then the more kind of got involved with Avid in kind of figuring out how it works, they set us up with a trial account, which is great. And then our editors kind of came on board. We didn't have a lot of time prior to, I think, production starting. We were really kind of just leaning into this with some backup solutions that included a lot of remote desktop jumping, like a jump software, yep, where it would be hosted elsewhere, and then our assistant editor in New Zealand could jump in. So we had some backups, but I really kind of leaned into edit on demand once I really understood how it would work. And in the process of playing with the trial, we used some footage, we put it up there, and it wasn't until production started that we really kind of got to really figure out all the ins and outs. But it's really allowed us to work across the world. All our data is being hosted out of the West 2 server, and that was something that was a critical decision, is to reduce any latency between the editor, the main editor, and where all the footage was going to be stored.
So you have someone in New Zealand uploading content to Edit on Demand, and you have someone in LA ultimately accessing that content. You have almost like a chasing the sun kind of workflow happening, and yet at the same time you have this real big disparity between the people where everybody's located, right?
Right, so that's right.
That's all working out pretty well.
It's working out pretty well. I mean, it was about a 30-day production schedule, shooting days. The first few weeks was relatively close to Wellington, where our assistant editor is based out of a facility there, and their life is just running, as normal as it can be. And then production moved out to a location that's very remote, about 2.5 hours away. And so the dailies workflow was an on-set DIT, kind of creating, a LUT and making changes on the fly. And then they would export both dailies media, on set at the end of the day, and as well as editorial media. And then we, selected on DNX, DNXR, 115, I believe we were using. And all that was put onto a hard drive and then traveled physically to the assistant editor, who would be at the facility to then receive it and then upload it through File Catalyst to the Nexus, in the cloud, basically on Edit Demand. And then from there, the main editor in LA could then log in and access that media, and basically we were able to start the editorial as scheduled.
That's great. I mean, that's pretty much consistent too with what we've heard from other folks in terms of their experience, right? They're just using Media Composer if it was sitting under their desk. And like Tim, you mentioned, it's running on a very powerful VM. So oftentimes it's actually giving you even better performance than maybe what you would have had on a system sitting on your desk, because maybe it was a couple of years old or whatever. And so that's one of the other benefits of the cloud, of course, is just the equipment that's available in there, right, is certainly oftentimes, ahead of where you might be yourselves, right, as an organization. So that's pretty cool. And then, of course, bandwidth wise, it's been also very positive, right? Everybody's using Teradata clients to access the VMs, and so it's been very good. So now you guys have some exposure to cloud and as a service models, right? That's the other thing we didn't really talk about, is the fact that this is an as a service model, right? So above and beyond some of the things Steve and Tim, you guys mentioned in terms of managing equipment and building out, and then basically hitting a limit, the convenience of spinning something up in the cloud, but then of course the convenience of spinning it back down, right, when it's over, right, paying only for what you're using is also kind of new, right? That's sort of a new way to operationally manage a production. But now that you've had some, experience, and even if it's limited or whatever, how has that changed if anything, in terms of how you're thinking about the future, right? In terms of being able to sort of burst capacity and add the ability to, sort of add these other editors and some of the benefits that maybe you're starting to realize as a net result of sort of the pandemic. Steve, why don't you go first?
Sure. One of the things as we do more in-house productions, what never changes is your air date, right?
Yeah.
So, as the show is in production, as you get closer to finishing the show and having to deliver it, the big thing is they feel like they're behind, they start throwing more editors at it, right? So you
Yeah, right.
kind of worked with 4 or 5 editors all along, and now all of a sudden you got to bring it up to 7, 8 editors. It's good to have the ability to just scale up and throw some more VM editors on there and just bring people in real quick, and that's been a big plus. The other big plus we found when working on an on-prem host, the client has to come in through our VPN, and VPN, we tend to be very strict with our network. We don't want freelancers or people that aren't employees to be VPNing into our network. So the nice thing about the Edit on Demand, that it is all up in the Azure, and you're handing out credentials to these people, and so nobody's really coming into your network. They're all working in the Avid environment, and it gives production companies a lot more flexibility about bringing editors in for a week or a couple days, or in the onboarding process a lot quicker. So it smooth things out.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. Tim, how about you? Similar thoughts in terms of how you're thinking now about cloud and burstability and spinning up resources like that?
Yeah, I think there was, a bit of cloud anxiety around our area, and just as it's a bit like, I don't know, I sort of draw a parallel with electric cars, and we'll probably go hybrid to start off with, because you still get that kind of cloud anxiety around costs, and someone going to leave something on, and I'm going to log in the next day and see some horrendous bill that I wasn't expecting. So far, touch wood, I've not seen that come in. So I'm really kind of pleased about that. But the one thing it does actually do is it does flag the cost of services. And when we were doing this 5-year cycle of CapEx and buying this storage, the production teams wouldn't necessarily have visibility of what that storage would cost. And so, there'd be quite high shooting ratios, things would be loaded up, and there'd be, that when it used to be on a tape, you'd know how many tapes you needed to take to a shoot. You knew how much a tape cost. That tape would go on a shelf, and then someone would say, hang on, that's a lot of tapes. You need to clear those out. You need to get those archived, and you probably put them on LTO tape. And absolutely, there's still a requirement for some of that, for the deeper archive. But I think we wanted to be a bit more modern in the way that we archived our tapes. We wanted to expose some of those costs, and I think this is an opportunity to do just that and give people a bit of visibility of what a daily running cost or an edit may cost. We were having to find bits of hardware around the business. We were adding bits of RAM here, there, and everywhere. So something that started at a certain tower and a certain spec, because we wanted to be on the latest and greatest software, we were having to swap bits out. And so we hopefully don't have to do that anymore. I think there's a bit of a mindset change around CapEx moving to an OpEx, but largely people are embracing that, because 5 years would sort of turn into 6 or 7 years sometimes, and we'd be really kind of pleading to change things and get that extra budget to replace things. But hopefully we won't be in as much of that world anymore. But for large, just for now, I think we will be hybrid for the time being. So we were not going to throw anything we've got. Right. I just don't think we'll be expanding it in the way we had been in that trajectory of bolting more physical equipment in place. I think we've definitely, the genie's out the bottle now, isn't it, so to speak? We've got some real lessons around, as Steve said, security. Access to things, is definitely a huge paramount importance. When you come into our premises, you use a pass. Well, we need to create a virtual version of that, really. It's like without breaking the workflow. So I think that's a big challenge. And the other big challenge, which might come to later, but it's over the shoulder stuff. So it's that that kind of sitting next to each other as a producer and editor relationship and partnership. We've got to kind of evolve the tool set for that, really, and help them with that challenge, because they aren't geographically sitting in the same room anymore. Yeah, no, that's a good point. The over the shoulder thing is definitely a big ask across the board. We have some things happening, right? You can kind of use Zoom or Teams, if you will, to do that. But we're definitely working on a better solution there as it relates specifically to Edit on Demand, so that you can get
sort of a couple different options in terms of sending certainly the output of a media composer to someone sitting at home and have a really, full experience in terms of resolution and quality, right? So Peter, how about you in terms of, going forward? I know you're right in the middle of it all, but I mean, in terms of how you're thinking now going forward in terms of, using the cloud as a source for editing into burst capacity, maybe even add talent. Your situation is so cool because you had such a kind of a distributed workflow, right? Of distributed workflows, right? You have people in completely different parts of the world sort of collaborating. So can you just talk about how that has sort of, evolved your thought around cloud?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really impressive what we were able to kind of accomplish, with relatively, minimal, I would say, troubleshooting. Any of the issues that we ran into weren't catastrophic by any means. We never lost any data, so we felt good. In fact, during the production, we actually shifted to another data center, and Avid did everything internally, and it was seamless. And so, and the support team with Avid has been really incredible. So, going forward, as I think about other productions in the future, it really allows us to consider, we're not tied down to where an editor is based. We can, this allows us to work, more collaboratively with editors, anywhere basically,
Yeah.
and it's not relegated to where production is happening. I think. And then, now that we've just gotten through principal photography and we're shifting into the director's cut period on this, we just started with the Zoom the feed of the record window, and so that's been sort of a shift. Now we're so we're just kind of getting adjusted to this, and but so far so good. There's been no latency issues, and so that, because I think that's the most important thing for those who aren't sort of familiar with how things have changed. I think the director is aware that we're the media's been hosted in the cloud, but hasn't really kind of experienced it. And any effort that we can do to kind of keep it as traditional as possible in terms of the feeling of it, I think is really helpful. He's used to editing in television, where you're working with the editor in a very, very accelerated pace, and so we're trying to sustain that sort of similar environment.
That's great. I mean, I think the point you made there about now in terms of talent and editing talent, and not necessarily being restricted to folks who are locally close to your facility. And now it's kind of really opened up that whole avenue, right, is a great point, because now not only can editors now not necessarily, they can move, right? They can move out of the city if they wanted to, right? They don't have to be in Hollywood per se, right, necessarily, right? I think that's going to evolve over time, right? So certainly some people want to be there, but folks who maybe aren't big city folks, but who want to be part of the media industry or the film industry can now maybe pretty much, work from home anywhere, right? As this becomes more and more ubiquitous in terms of where it's available. That's a great point. I also love the point about security, Tim, that you made. A lot of folks security is always going to be a concern, right? Period. No matter what, whether it's, security to what you've deployed in the facility or certainly accessing from the cloud. So that's always going to be an ongoing battle, of course. But one of the things we found is that as the pandemic wore on, business continuity sort of, I wouldn't say lower the standard on security, but certainly evolve people's thinking, right, in terms of maybe some of the worries, right, around cloud security. That isn't to say, though, that there isn't a ton of security built into the solution. Of course there is, and we're always going to evolve and make that even better. So that kind of leads me to, I guess, what would be sort of my last question, which is, as you guys now have had some experience, you've all done real projects in edit on demand and just in the cloud in general, right? When you look forward, right, and you sort of see some of the things that are coming technology-wise, right? 5G, for example, being rolled out, in a more broad way, and becoming, of course, giving you more access and bandwidth, and maybe even more interactivity ultimately between consumers and even the content rights holders and distributors, and just other trends, right, in terms of more powerful phones and devices. What do you guys see, when you start to think about sort of near and maybe even longer term future? Any technologies or anything you think will help make the move to either as a service and or cloud-based productions even more appealing? Steve, why don't you start?
Sure. The biggest thing our clients have is, where's my media? And Peter talked a lot about how does it get from the shoot to edit as quick as possible. And
Yeah.
you know, the biggest hurdle there is the transcode process in there, and then also we've got all the raw stuff that we want to save later to conform later. But that process, I see a lot of growth around there, especially with 5G networks and some better technologies that are coming in there. I did have a conversation with Avid with some camera to cloud workflows.
Yeah.
Not quite merged into edit on demand yet, but I think it's all converging.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a sort of an industrial revolution so far, really, and I think there are many other pluses that we aren't necessarily obvious straight away. So, I mean, you use the Microsoft Azure engine for the AI services while you're up in the cloud. You can get speech to text, which is great for logging. You can get emotion and face recognition in there. There are a whole gamut of tools that are available that when we're putting our archive on LTO tape, it was very safe and it was very cost effective. But I think it's time to sort of unlock some of those extra tools that are available in the cloud. And we're working with Avid, we're working with Azure and support partners as well. That's been an eye-opener and Mastech for the move of our media from on-site up into the cloud. We're lucky that we've got that kind of terra firma of a platform and a team of people who can handle the ingest and then upload on a large pipe. I think as connections get better, people might be doing stuff direct from live views and from SRT streams. Currently, we're using SRT instead of an ingest mechanism. We're actually evolving that into a bit of a virtual Bob, as we're calling it, or breakout box, so that we can do over the shoulder with the SRT stream. So we can we're landing our studio outputs onto people's laptops. So there's no reason why we can't land with a bit of NDI stream and conversion to SRT. There's no reason why people can't soon be looking at a timeline on their iPad while they're working on the laptop if they've got the connectivity. So that's really cool. Sustainability is a massive thing for a lot of businesses at the moment. It's ITV is no different there, and we're talking to lots of partners about in our supply chain about sustainability. And Microsoft as a partner, fantastic. They've invested $1 billion towards becoming carbon negative, and I think this whole piece can play into that new drive for being greener. And it should do. We should be more aware of what we're buying, what we're powering, what we're cooling. So it's all opened up, from this one, tragic situation. We're getting some positive, and we're getting some, COVID catalyst, as it were, of change, a real change. So I'm encouraged by everything we've seen so far, and I'm really, really keen to put more and more bits in the cloud and trial it, and then and evolve it.
That's great. Yeah, it's kind of the sky's the limit. Peter, what do you think going forward?
Yeah, I think going forward, it's going to give independent editors, I think, the opportunity to kind of get more involved in professional projects, because the access to there's, I feel like in the independent world, there's a lot of DIY filmmakers out there who have their own computer setup, and now this is allowing you to kind of jump in. I mean, all you need to do is get your Avid EOD account and then install your Teradici client, and then you're able to jump in. You don't need the Avid machine anymore, necessarily. And so I think there's an access point there. I mean, I've been using Avid since Avid, I think, expressed DV in film school, and and tracking it along the way. And so this is a real revolution. And it's the access to the Nexus, which can be very expensive on-prem. Because in the feature world, we don't generally own any of the equipment, the hardware. It's always a facility that we go into, and this is just opening that up.
That's amazing. Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said. I think sort of the sky's the limit here in terms of what's possible going forward. Tim, I love that you mentioned services and being able to leverage AI, machine learning going forward. I think a lot of people talk about that, but I think that it's somewhat limited so far in terms of how many folks are really using that in the day-to-day operation, whether that's to do some type of metadata enhancement on historical library, or even doing projects and doing different aspects of that project in parallel, like transcripting or even editing, right, and creating string outs and things like that, where you can use the metadata to help create those string outs and sort of even automate in areas where, in the past you kind of had to do all that in parallel, right? And that added time. And part of that was because it was, hard to get access to the content, right? The availability of the content was difficult. Now that the walls are kind of coming down and, you all mentioned some form of IP, SRT, live view, whatever the case may be, sending content now as proxies, all of that is now becoming, very real as well. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Just phenomenal discussion. And, of course, us Avid talking about these things is one thing, but hearing it from you guys who are living it and doing it every single day is just amazing.